Great to be with you guys on a super historic day. I can't think of a single day in regular session that we've had two bills passed that were so transformational as HB1 and then 837 on Tort. And I have with me today Kaylee Tuck, who championed HB1, which will provide customized learning for all of our Florida students. It addresses a wait list for children with unique abilities like autistic children, and will really change the lives of Florida's children for the better for generations to come. And with me also Chair Gregory, Tommy Gregory, and Tom Fabricio, who ran the bill on tort reform legislation to really get the lawsuit abuse out of the process and end the tort tax that is imposed on every single Floridian, and also make our businesses more competitive. That bill also will be transformative for the climate here in Florida. And so with that, I'll take your questions about the week's events and any questions you have.
Yeah, how will the Civil Remedies bill affect everyday Floridians? Sorry, did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, look, I think what it's going to do is when you get out some of the gamesmanship that is played in the legal community, I'm a litigator, it will have the effect of, over time, lowering the cost to everyone because we'll pay less. We've already gone through property insurance, auto insurance, all these other areas. But beyond that, it also ripples throughout the economy. So if businesses are having to defend frivolous lawsuits, which we believe this bill will end, then that gets passed through in the cost of goods and the cost of services, in the kind of steps that they can take and access to different things that we may enjoy that we now can't enjoy because they're in a cocoon or in a kind of a fetal position, worried about the next fraudulent litigation that's going to come at their doorstep. And so businesses that have been put out of business will now, that will not take place. And so I think it will have a lot of benefits, and yet we've also tried to be fair. We've made a number of adjustments that I think are worth mentioning on that bill, both large and small, so that I feel, having sat down before we put this bill on the floor with both sides and said, let's walk line by line through this, that we hit a good spot, that we hit a fair spot.
What would you say some of the larger changes were that got you to this point? Like, what were the large changes you made?
You mean since the bill was filed?
Yeah, to make it
Sure,
more
yeah, that's a good question. I think on bad faith, there was some confusion about whether bad faith was going to give insurers some kind of get out of jail free pass, which we would not want. When insurers engage in bad faith, they need to get hammered if it's really bad faith. And so we made adjustments there to make sure that they had a fair opportunity to do the right thing.
Are you talking about changing it to 90 days? Or
Yeah. Well, there was some language before that people thought that at the end of the whole process that they could come to the end after they've committed egregious bad faith and say, here's my policy limits, I'm out. And so we made clear in the bill that would not take place, and made those, actually, I think, 3 steps from where we had it. The first move we made was, the complaint plus 90 days, and then we moved to 120 days after notice, and we shortened that down to 90 days after notice. And so those changes resolve those concerns for our members. So that was on bad faith. And the other 2 big changes we made were in the area of damages and transparency and damages. And I believe that, if you have a legitimate complaint, and there will be many, many lawsuits, thousands of lawsuits after this bill is filed, that are legitimate, and we don't ever want somebody walking away who's been seriously injured as a result of someone's negligence to go away with $1 less than what they deserve. And I believe we hit the mark by allowing all relevant evidence to come into the court while still exposing some of the mispractices, some of the unethical or questionable practices with respect to letters of protection, where the jury only hears the number that was charged, but they don't know the doctor got paid, a fraction of that before trial. They never see that information, so they're not being given the whole story to make an informed decision. So we've done that by putting all that information in front of the jury, in addition to everything else that the plaintiff may want the jury to consider for their well-being, both in the past and also into the future.
And just a technical follow-up, but you're not allowing the jury to see the amount of the insurance, like how much insurance really was the policy for. That isn't something that the jury is able to see. Like, was it a $10 million policy? Was it $2 million?
Yeah, I mean the amount of the policy, and I don't know why that would be relevant, frankly, because
transparency, right?
No, but it doesn't go to, if you get a $10 million policy, you give people $10 million if they have $1 million of damages. I don't think that's relevant, because then that, I think, is an example of something that's more prejudicial than probative, as we would say. to the extent it's relevant at all, it's far, far more prejudicial to know that than to simply say, what are the damages? And they have the full amount of information so that the defense and the plaintiff can both come forward and say, this is what's fair, but as they both see it. The jury can make a decision, and whatever it is, it is. And if there's space under the policy, then that's what they get charged. John?
Could I ask you a voucher
Yes.
question? Voucher.
Yeah.
I wonder any conversations you may have had with the governor on this. 'Cause the governor has had a little bit of pause on the universal voucher idea, I think, in perhaps the amount of money going to people that otherwise are of financial means and have chosen to go to private schools. That this would be a little bit of a largesse to them.
Yeah.
And then also a question about the availability of private schools, that this could, he seems to be suggesting that there could be a substantial influx of students from public schools to private schools, and private schools are unavailable to take them, even though the state is sort of promising you could go to private schools. Have you gotten any assurance from him he's good with this bill?
Well, I'll let the governor speak for himself, and I won't speak to any private conversations we've had, but I think the governor is a champion for educational freedom, which is what this bill really represents. And when you talk about, the uptake, I think our experience from like in Arizona is very different because we've been at this for 25 years. And so we're pretty far up the pyramid in terms of the people that are already eligible and using vouchers. I don't think you're going to see some dramatic influx. I think our estimates are going to be, fair, and we may put a little extra in the budget just to have a buffer to keep people at ease over that. But when you talk about people of higher means, right now there's no eligibility requirement for children with unique abilities. There's no eligibility with respect to VPK. But I think more importantly is, everybody pays in their taxes. If you're in a really, really affluent neighborhood, you probably have one of the best public schools, traditional public schools in your area, and all of those rich kids get to go there for free. It's just you have to be able to afford a really, really expensive house to go to that school. And so I think it's fair to go to universality and just say, look, public education is about our commitment to every single student, that we will allow the money to follow the backpack, that money follows the student. And what this bill does that's so special is then put customization around that through the ESAs that allows you to have complete flexibility. And I think eventually we'll get to a place where you can go the other way. You can say, I'm a homeschool kid, but I'm going to go for a couple days a week to a traditional public school because they have a great physics program. This is not to prejudice in any way, shape, or form our public schools. I think choice has unquestionably made them more competitive. It has made them step up their game. We have many, many great public schools and great public school teachers. And beyond that, today is effectively day one of our regular session on the floor. It is going to be a very, very good year for our traditional public schools, as I said in my initial remarks, with some things that you'll see rolled out over the coming weeks. Some you've already seen, whether it's our reading and math outcomes bill, the discussion about reformation of the FEFP that will create some greater flexibility for our school districts, teacher salary increases, and there's more to come. So it's going to be a great, great year for our traditional public schools as well. And at the end of the day, all that matters is the students. It's not about institutions, whether it's private schools or public schools or charter schools. It's about, do kids get the very best education we can possibly provide them in a customized way, and whatever we do to enhance that, we should do, and whatever detracts from that, we should not do. And so everything we do in that space will be geared toward that.
On that line, can we talk about the accountability measures? What are the accountability measures on vouchers? Why are they more stringent for public schools and on vouchers that would go to homeschool kids or private schools?
Yeah, and you don't fix all the world's problems in a day. One of the changes to HB1, as Chair Tuck mentioned, from going from good to great, is we did some dereg, or if you will. We looked at the public schools and said, hey, what are they doing? What are they required to do that just doesn't make common sense? It's not a health safety issue. How can we make their lives a little bit easier, a little less costly? We've done that. We've also commissioned, a further study to go look at that again, next session, which we'll do. But there is accountability, both regulatory accountability in the sense that everybody that gets a scholarship has to take a norm reference test. We want to know, are they succeeding or not succeeding? But there's also market accountability. And so as I've said before, every business has an entrance and an exit. And the old model was like the Hotel California. You can enter, but you can never leave. If you're zip coded to that area and the school fails you, too bad. And so we've now, through multiple different years, and it's not just this year, we've introduced choice within public schools so that kids in the public school system can go to other public schools if there's opportunity there. And so that's really market regulation. It's really about parents and students saying, are my needs met? And just like any other business, if you get a bad attitude, if you get bad service or bad goods, you go somewhere else. And so that's the way our schools should be. And I think we'll see our public schools, our traditional public schools, compete and win against many other schools in certain areas, and in other areas they won't. And where they fail, then we need to have that option for those kids to go to a charter school, which is public, to an online school, a home school, a private school, wherever they can best be served, including subdividing that so that a child may mix and match between those different options. So I think we're taking the next giant step towards both universality, which we've achieved, but also customization and true flexibility. And I think that we'll continue to see learning gains in all of those different areas.
And if I may, another on education, there's bills moving about that would, it's regarding the pronouns, the pronoun use in schools. Where is your stance on parental choice regarding, consent from individual parents if they want their child to use a pronoun that is not assigned to them?
Yeah, I believe the thing is that the bill is designed to not force you to address people by pronouns. I think there's a lot of this kind of discussion that in my mind belongs off to the side every day that we have half of our kids who aren't reading on grade level. Every day that we have many of our kids, and this is in all schools, not just directly to public schools, that are not on reading level, on level for math, for example, with the Chinese. We have, global competition and frankly global adversaries, and so we need to make sure that all of our time, all of our attention is really focused on educational excellence and not some left-wing wish list of what kids should learn in school, or right-wing left wish list on what should be learned in school. We can all agree, no matter where people are on the political spectrum, about what kids need to learn. And we should redouble our focus on those things, get those things right, and we are the best in the whole world at that. We can have those other conversations about wasting time on pronouns and other things, but I just don't think they belong in the classroom.
So
John, let me just go to somebody who hasn't asked a question.
So speaking of HB1, so on top of expanding the eligibility, you're also widening what people can buy, what they can spend the money on. But at the same time, the Senate and the House, their estimates expect like 50 to 60% of kids will participate. How confident are you that the $20 million in new funding will be enough, and there won't be an influx of kids, not just from public schools, but in general, who want to use this, whether it's for private school or the other expanded needs?
Yeah, I mean, look, estimates are estimates. We think we have a good estimate. Just to be clear and transparent with you, the way we have it, we have money coming out at FTC, which is otherwise coming into the coffers, and so that's a significant chunk. And so I think I may have given you $200 million. That's new revenue that we would be supplying in addition to a few $100 million in FTC monies that are already there and are consistently recurring. And so we think that's a reasonable uptake, about 50% uptake. It could be a little more, it could be less. I suspect that it will grow over time as word of mouth comes through, but you will have, and John, I think you mentioned, the governor talked about, an absence of seats in some private schools, that there'll be some self-limits there. There'll be some private schools, regrettably, that say we don't want to take the scholarship, and that's their right. So I just don't think you're going to see this explosion overnight, and we think our estimate is an accurate estimate, but if it's 55% instead of our 50% estimate, don't come back and say, you were wrong, I was right. You may be right, but it may be 45%. But we think it's a good faith estimate. That's what we're budgeting off of. We may look in the budget. We have the money to do so at putting an extra 50 or 100 million into the budget, just so we eliminate the argument that some have made that, hey, if this happens, then you're going to start prorating FEFP for the public schools. We don't want to do that. We want to just end that idea altogether. But we think the estimate's a good estimate, and we'll see where it goes.
Last question.
Do you expect any other tort bills to pass this session?
They're going to go through the process. I mean, I think this is a package that we looked at from the standpoint of what can we do that's non-industry specific that would address some of the outliers, some of the gamesmanship, and bring us into kind of the middle of the fairway in terms of litigation, allowing good claims to go forward, but carving out those junk lawsuits. There are other bills that have merit and to varying degrees, and the members will make a decision on whether they should move forward or not, as will the Senate. I know we have a construction defects bill up that I believe is a good bill that'll pass next week. But beyond that, it's going to work through the system, and we'll see what
Can I
happens.
get a
because
bonus
there's
question?
no guarantee that those bills are going to move to
One bonus question.
Bonus
for John
question.
Kennedy.
Anybody else
I
before
have
John?
a
Okay,
bonus
okay, you asked to. Okay, bonus question for you and
I
Anna.
can ask quickly. Mine is sort of where education and immigration coincide. I'm wondering, there is an immigration bill that is moving forward. It does not include what the governor has called for, which is stopping undocumented students from getting in-state tuition. Is that going to appear in legislation this year?
I mean, I think we're gonna address the governor's concerns there. And look, we have a radically different scenario than when that bill passed years ago, in the sense that there's zero border enforcement. We have millions and millions of people coming across. That type of cost issue is a concern of mine, as well as healthcare costs. That's a concern, should be a concern for all taxpayers, where you have a large influx of people who just don't have the means to provide for themselves, and that means the taxpayers have to pick up the bill. But the other piece of immigration, not to your question, but that we have to be mindful of is human trafficking. A lot of the women and children that are coming across the borders are being victimized on their way in, and even being sold into forced labor or into human trafficking. Once they get across, they're being duped along the way. And then also fentanyl. China has given us COVID, and now they've given us fentanyl, and it's killing Americans by the tens of thousands. And so these are the reasons why we have to be serious about immigration enforcement. At some point, the federal government needs to solve something. They need to solve anything, which they seem to have an incapacity to do. Immigration would be a good place to start. Even former President Trump had a solution that addressed dreamers, that addressed all these things. We need a comprehensive solution that begins with border enforcement and shuts down the just total open borders that we have right now. But Republicans and Democrats, there's a place to land that does this in the right way. But in the meantime, Florida has to protect us and create those incentives, so there's not an incentive for illegals to come into the state of Florida. And that's one way you do it, by not giving away free tuition.
Right. Well, you have tens of thousands of students right now that are undocumented that are getting in-state tuition. Do they lose that?
I don't know that we do that. I don't know that we do that. We have to look at that.
But maybe going forward, you would say.
It may be going
stop.
forward, and again, I'm going to defer to the wisdom of our membership in the House and Senate on they're going to hear from everybody in greater detail on what the right thing, the fair thing to do is on that front.
Thanks, everyone.
That's really
One bonus question for Anna.
There is identical bills in the Senate and the House that would target the exposing children to drag queen shows. The bills include a penalty of up to a year if there's a violation of the paragraph of that proposed law. Are you supportive of up to a year for businesses who violate that?
Yeah, and I'll again defer to the membership and their wisdom as the bill goes through on what the proper enforcement mechanism is. What I will say is that, look, this is, there's a total difference between adult entertainment, which is what this is, and if adults want to, be drag queens and go to drag queen shows, that is their God-given American right to do so, and that nothing what we're doing this session infringes on that. But this is about kids. And should kids be walking through a public park and seeing a drag show any more than they should be seeing a strip show? And I would say it's adult entertainment. Yeah, I mean, I think in a public venue, and I know the bill talks about that. Not all this parent would not want my little kids having to answer questions about what's happening with the guy in the beard that's dressed like a woman. So I'm not sure that helped their cause. But anybody else before I get the hook?
Could I ask
You had two already. Hold on a second. She hasn't had a question. I gave you a bonus question, you a bonus question, you a bonus question.
Senator Pasadomo said that the Senate does not support the rollback of the age on those guns.
Yeah.
What do you think that means for the bill?
Well, I don't think they didn't file a bill, and we thought they were going to file a bill. Look, I'll give you my perspective on it, and we said this before, and now you've seen what I'd referred to earlier, which is a lot of very good, tough on crime bills. Both, Sam Garrison has both of these bills with respect to bail reform and with respect to taking the theft and use of guns even more seriously and elevating that to a place where we treat it like a violent felony, right? And so there's that piece, which is where the vast majority, if not all the gun crimes are taking place in that realm, and we're going to get very serious and tough on that. At the same time, we have to deal with the vast majority of people who are law-abiding, who have an absolute God-given right, a constitutional right to defend themselves and those they love. And so that means even if you're 19 years old, you have a right to defend yourself. You're 20 years old, you're threatened by an ex-boyfriend, and you're in college. Whatever it is, you should be able to keep and bear arms for your self-defense. And what this bill really does as a practical matter is, as you know, our bill that made that restriction allows you to possess that same firearm. But you never get a background check in that circumstance if somebody hands you the gun, gives you the gun. So really all this would do as a practical matter is allow that 19 or 20-year-old, if they wish to purchase a gun, to go through the normal process with a background check. The federal government, a Democrat president, Democrat House, a Democrat Senate said it was enough for them to just do enhanced background checks for those under 21. It should be enough for us in a Republican-led legislature, I think, to do that. And so, in addition, some of the circuit courts have come down and said this is unconstitutional, and I believe that's probably the case. And so, I think it's just time for us to, as we always do, look at how facts and circumstances have changed, and that federal legislation has changed circumstances, as has the court decisions that have come through since we passed that bill. So, I think it's the responsible thing to do to make that change in light of those change of circumstances, but also the right thing to do under the Second Amendment. And so I support it 100%. My intent is that we'll get it on the House floor, we'll pass it, we'll send it to the Senate, and they have independent judgment and they have to decide what they want to do on that bill, and that's entirely up to them. They're a separate part of our branch of government, and they get to make their own decisions on that.
Isn't it sort of sensitive, though, because of the nature of the way it was passed in the first place after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas? Doesn't that add another element to this debate that goes beyond, just for a lot of people at least, that goes beyond the simple fact that it may be a Second Amendment issue?
Yeah, I don't think anytime I don't think you can use the circumstances of that to enshrine in stone forever what we did because I was there, a very, very short amount of time in a rush. Good policy is not always done in a rush. However, I think on balance, because I voted for it, that it did a lot more good. Just the gun control piece of it was not something I was particularly excited about, but it did school hardening. It set us on a path where if we're not already the gold standard, I believe we are the gold standard for school safety. But I will just say to you that we are making changes. We have made changes to improve school safety each and every year in response to the recommendations from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission. We're doing that again this year. There's a lot of exciting, in fact, the bill that relates to constitutional carry will have in it some school safety measures. There are other bills that are running that deal with making sure we have an electronic picture of a schoolhouse, because these buildings were built 50 years ago may show classroom 302 on a hard copy blueprint, when in fact it's been renamed, and now you have emergency responders going in with false information. They need to have uploaded with our technology the ability to see inside that classroom, inside that schoolhouse, before they go in, if God forbid that situation ever arises. We need to enhance our Guardian program. We need to do those things. So my point is, those are all changes that go beyond what was in that bill after the Parkland shooting, and that is always the responsible thing to do, to keep building on our success and also recede from things that we say cast too broad a net. What we did there is we said, okay, to the tens of thousands of 19 and 20-year-olds out there in Florida, we're going to just infringe on your constitutional rights, and I just don't think that's appropriate. You could lose those rights, If you commit acts of domestic violence, there's obviously good criteria in our laws that cause you to lose your Second Amendment rights because you forfeited them by your own misbehavior. But for those that are law-abiding, they have an absolute right to defend themselves and others, and that doesn't start at age 21 unless we decide that adulthood doesn't start until 21. And as long as we're taking people into the military, as I was, as many of my colleagues were, then 18 is a good number.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.